Welcome back to the Geek and the Guru podcast for the Series 66. My name is Brian Lee, the Test Geek, and alongside my wingman, my ever-trusted wingman, the Series 7 Guru, Dean Tinney. What's happening, Dean? How are you today?
Nothing much. Excited for episode 4 of our collaboration on this podcast series.
Absolutely.
Series 66. You're hosting today. What do you got in mind for us in episode 4?
Well, we've got the biggest and the baddest section of the Series 66, the laws and regs. 45 of those bad mothers, right? 45% of the test on laws and regs. And we'd like to take a look at the definitions and registration of persons. Dean, you and I have worked on these collaboratively several times. I think we have a nice method of kind of consolidating that stuff. Again, ad nauseum, I've mentioned this. This is kind of the origin of the Test Geek, is trying to put this stuff, turning mashed potatoes into premium vodka, right? And we've come up with a little cheat sheet that helps cut through the 87 pages of textbook to help you with the registration definitions of persons. One thing, if I could, before I turn it over to you a little bit, I first try to tell people that, knowing the basic definition of these persons to begin with. For example, just give you a quick example, broker-dealer, right? Persons that affect securities transactions for the benefits of others or themselves. All right. For me, that gives me a basic kind of picture in mind as to what a broker-dealer actually does. Mm-hmm. Right. And then, of course, we go into the registration requirements. They have to have an office and or a client who is a resident of that state. One thing I add to that, if they mail something or if they just call somebody in a particular state, that counts as a client who is a resident of that state. Dean, anything that you can come up with?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Ways for people to remember this stuff.
Well, first thing I like to start with is it's very similar. Is where depending on your background, persons don't necessarily mean living, breathing human beings walking planet Earth. So that is important for us because we have definitions of what we call natural persons. Those are going to be agents of the broker-dealer and investment advisor reps. Those are living, breathing human beings walking planet Earth, right? And that means that they can be held accountable. We also, though, have unnatural persons, and those would be the broker-dealers and the investment advisors, not living, breathing human beings walking planet Earth, however, can be held accountable. And then that's what that really means, is to say that if you're a person, you'll be held accountable, which leaves those questions about who's not a person, who can't be held accountable. Minors, dead people, whatever the case may be. So I know, Brian, you probably get some attorney types taking this exam and they say, man, Dean, if I don't pass, it's going to be embarrassing. I say, absolutely. Because if anybody should understand these legalese, these definitions, it certainly should be you. And the other thing, I love your definition about broker-dealer. Just again today, Brian, people get so confused about whether the question is about a broker-dealer or an investment advisor. And I think you do a really great job on that cheat sheet. But the person was hung up on de minimis in this broker-dealer question. I said, listen, that is not the right answer. You can wish it is, but it's not. Please read the question again. It's about a broker-dealer. So these definitions are important when test takers read the question to be very sure what they're being asked about. Broker-dealer, investment advisor. On that investment advisor side, it can get messier, federally not. Agent, and then you really got to be on your toes. I know in your practice test, I don't think it's a gotcha question, Brian, that you have, but test takers sometimes miss one of your questions, and it's the same deal. It's not a gotcha question; it's that they didn't read the question. Right? You got state X and state B and state D, and it doesn't have any meaning.
Not to specifically reveal answer choices to test questions, because we all know that's prohibited, but I wouldn't be surprised if some of the answer choices, again, let's take broker-dealer as an example, where one answer choice might say a person affecting securities transactions, and another answer saying and individual affecting securities transactions. As you just mentioned, broker-dealers are unnatural persons. They are not people living, breathing, walking planet Earth. So you can separate that person from an individual. It's absolutely correct. And again, we try to consolidate this stuff. One time, I did this intentionally in class because I knew, and in a class of 30 people, there would be 16 that would say, no more than 5, right? Everybody remembers, for some reason in those textbooks, that de minimis exemption, but it does not apply to broker-dealers. As a matter of fact, it doesn't apply in most cases, most persons.
Right.
We'll see a little bit later where it only applies, but it doesn't apply to broker-dealers. It doesn't apply to agents. It doesn't apply to the majority of IAs. So we'll see that. So do not apply that de minimis everywhere.
I joke that one of the things that make the 66 difficult is, first, you got to stuff it all into your brain housing group. And that's where I think some of that comes from, because they haven't compartmentalized that information yet. And that is why that cheat sheet of yours is helpful, because it helps them compartmentalize that information. In fact, you literally have it in boxes. And sometimes what I'll do is assuming they've got your cheat sheet, I'll say, listen, let's just put you in these boxes. Which box are you in? Which box is your firm in? Try and put yourself in the context of the question. Oh, agent, that's me. That's my 663 or 763, whatever the case may be. Oh, investment advisor rep. Oh, that's me, right? 66 means that's who you are, assuming you pass, right? So that can be a little helpful.
Yeah, and of course, you know how I am. I love drawing on my whiteboard. Yeah. I can't talk unless I have a dry erase pen in my hand. And I draw a box for a broker-dealer, and I draw a box for an IA with a roof.
Right.
Subconsciously, that actually differentiates the two, right? Because it's drawn slightly differently. And I go, affect securities transactions here. IAs are different. This is what they do, right? They're fiduciaries. They're more holistic. They do this, that, and the other thing, just to separate them into mind. And then I go, now, let's take a look at the real world. And I glue those two together, right? Because most of the big firms are dual registered as both.
Right.
And you walk into that office and it's like, where's the broker-dealer and IA? You can't tell. You can't see it, right? There's no wall that separates one from the other.
There is no physical separation.
Business and the type of compensation they receive, which really differentiates those two, right?
Yeah. I think the key words there are on the broker-dealer side, right? Markup, markdowns, and commissions. That means broker-dealer.
Yeah.
And for the most part, there can be fees for brokerage services, but that fee for investment advice, right? So I joke, the broker-dealer side, the transactions are what pay for the relationship.
That's
right.
right.
The investment advisory side, it's the fee that pays for the relationship, right?
Exactly. So that's exactly right.
No free lunch. You're paying one way or another.
That's right. Yeah. And the commissions are paid only for transactions.
That's right.
It's solely transaction based, where IAs don't have to be. There are transactional based fees, but it's assets under management most times that that quarterly or annually fee based on the percentage of assets under management, that kind of thing, right? And I try to also explain the myriad of differences of IAs out there, right? Where you have the independent IAs out there all by themselves, and then they hire out the broker dealers and the custodians and put them on a little platform, right? And that's where they put all the security. So I try to visualize all of that stuff for them. And you're absolutely right. You got to categorize. I sometimes joke about the little guy in my head who's in a pink cashmere sweater, right? And he's running up the stairs trying to find, he goes, nope, that's the broker-dealer file. I need the IA file, right? Because it's categorized. It helps you to order.
Just again, today I was tutoring somebody, Brian, again, of what we talk about, right? She missed it because she said 5 years, and that would have been correct if it was an investment advisor. It was a broker dealer. So it was 3, and it gets aggravating, but that's the nature of the dragon that needs to be slayed, right?
That's exactly right. And included in some of these, not just the definitions, but also the registration requirements. I find it interesting that there is a net capital requirement for the IA, who's registered with state administrators,
Mm-hmm.
but no net capital requirement for federal. It's not in federal law, it's only in
That's
state
right.
law.
That's right.
And some of those subtleties that may or may not be asked, I know they can show up from time to time.
Yeah.
Well, also those registration requirements, the record keeping. See, that's an ongoing registration procedure.
Right.
Or those things. Speaking of registration procedures for reps, investment advisor reps, right? We all know we have to have this criminal background check, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what would prohibit you from registration as an agent or any of these other, right? And everybody remembers felony past 10 years.
Right.
But then I go, now, would that be a felony arrest or a felony arraignment? A felony conviction? Because they play those subtle things on the test. And you got to know specifically, it's got to be for a felony conviction.
Right.
Because someone's arrested for a felony doesn't mean they are a felon, right?
That's right.
Everybody's innocent until proven guilty, I guess.
That's right.
But that's one of the subtleties for some of those registration procedures. Right. Again, I tell people that the first thing you got to get through for the Series 66 is differentiating between the federal IA and the state IA, the federal IAR and the state IAR. Mm-hmm. That's number one. That's where you got to begin.
Right.
And I don't think that's overly difficult if you keep it simple, right? And of course, it starts with AUM, right? Greater than 110. Now, that number, I'll bet you dollars to a bag of donuts, you'll never see the number 110 million on the test. Never.
Yeah.
It's just a threshold. You might see, well, XYZ advisor firm who has 180 million in assets. Well, there you go. It's above the threshold. That tells you it's a federal advisor.
I always say
home office in state A. They have clients in state B, seminar. You know these questions.
Right.
Seminars in state C. Which of these states do they have to register in? None.
That's right. It's never both. Brian, even just today, I continue to receive debrief that it's just what you said. The question is not a recognition of the 100 or the 90 or the 110, but rather where they give you firms, and then you have to pull out of the mix the firm that's federally covered. Okay. And Kaplan had a practice question I just was doing today, and I shared screen final with somebody, and it was 138 million. And it was up to her to recognize that 138 is over the threshold, therefore federally covered. And then the thing we always want you to know, it's never, ever both. I don't know how we can stress that to folks. They keep trying to, once you say federally covered, your point about it doesn't matter about state A or B or C or D.
And that's to your point about, categorizing and organizing that information. In the cheat sheet, I try to do the same thing under federally covered advisors, right? The threshold greater than 110 million, register with the SEC. Now I tell everybody, I stop and say, okay, now we need to add one more word. Only SEC only. There is no registration for federal covered advisor. It's you try to.
And as we say, what follows from that is really important, because now the second part of the flow chart, if you will, in answering the question is, now is this an investment advisor rep of a federally covered advisor or a federally investment advisor rep of state? Because then again, you can get in the weeds if it's the state. If it's federal, life is easy.
So now watch this, right? So, we drill into the fact that the federally covered IA, the firm, right, registers only with the SEC.
Right.
But the federally covered IAR, it's with the state administrator.
That's right.
So the rep, the IAR, is with the administrator. Now, what state? He's got 15 clients in this state, 32 clients in that state. But his office from where he works is the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter where the clients are. So, it's hard to keep all of that straight. That's why you've got to flow chart it, categorize it. You've absolutely got to do that. I got one of those.
Oh, yeah.
I got one of those. Man, I'll tell you what, when I first did that,
Mhm.
2011 is the first, I can still remember it.
Yeah.
2011, I first did that. And I thought,
Yeah.
wow, now I even remember it better, which makes it better to teach and easier to teach
Right.
in that 2.5 hour afternoon class. Remember when we
That's
had
right.
to do it?
I got to move pretty quick and back in the day on the Uniform Securities Act. So, right on. So,
Yeah,
broker dealers, you just got to remember one retail client.
office
Boom.
and any client in the resident.
Yeah,
Yep,
that's it. Right.
that's it.
I think the broker dealers is pretty straightforward. And I think, uh, uh,
I say the same
whether
thing.
it's the vendors, whether it's the test taker, I think they make that unnecessarily complicated. Right? So your point, office and state, register. Retail client and state, register.
Dean, don't get me started on those.
Okay. Vendors, yeah. But anyways, broker dealer side, pretty straightforward. And then I think what people need to know is usually it flows from there, the agent of the broker dealer, right? You have a retail client, got to get registered. That's right.
Yeah, yeah. Again, I always ask people before I get into agents what their definition is, and they always include in the definition someone who works for a broker dealer. And I go 99%, but be
Yeah.
careful. There is another, and I go, okay, I'm founder, president, chief bottle washer of Test Geek Exam Prep, and
Yeah.
I'm issuing securities, and I'm accepting and placing orders for interested investors.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? I'm going to have to register under a U10 as opposed to U4 as an agent in that case.
Right.
Anytime someone accepts or places orders, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to register as an agent.
That's right.
Only exception is if I work for an exempt issuer, muni, levy, bank, that kind of thing. See, to me, I think agent is even easier than broker dealer too. You accept or place orders, you got to register.
Yeah, and I would tell you the thing we're talking about 45 potential test questions. Well, they would say potential. There is 45.
Exactly.
But the registrations of the broker dealer and agent of the broker dealer are not as testable as registration of investment advisory firms and investment advisor representatives. So, in terms of test takers making decisions, I say, would I like you to know everything? The answer is yes. Now, given that you have limited brain space, NASA is the one making you take the test, and it's primarily going to be focused in this area of the exam on the idea of registering the investment advisory firm and the investment advisor rep, and then the state versus federal. So, and the state is more important than federal anyways, but yeah, no, should you know both? The answer is yes.
So let's see if we can nail one another down.
Okay.
For folks who are listening to this, the definition, registration, procedures of persons, broker dealers, agents, IAs, IARs. In total, what would you say?
Oh, let's see.
I'm putting your fanny to the fire here.
I'm going to go with nine.
Very good.
Right? Is that what you would have said?
I was going to be a little broader. I like to be a little bit more conservative.
Okay.
I say 7 to 10. That's right.
Okay.
I'm right with you there. I like it.
Okay.
Yeah. So the IAR, again, is a little bit more problematic. I just want to repeat this. The federally covered IAR, right? And they got clients all over the place. Remember, it's only about their office, where the physical state, the physical office in which they're working.
I call the 2 steps, right? First is to say, okay, the question is about an investment advisor. Second, is the investment advisor federally covered or state? Then we move on to the investment advisor rep.
Yep.
And that is where the focus now becomes in terms of answer the question. So in this exam, NASA exams, you've got to really own that question intellectually before you jump in.
Exactly right.
We say RTFQ, read the full question. RTFQ, read the full answer set. I had a guy yesterday, Brian Toughlove, and I said, listen, my friend, you're not in the spot yet to be doing practice questions because, to be honest with you, you don't even know what you're being asked.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what you're being asked, you don't even know the answers that are being offered to you. You need to lay some base. And I thought he took in strike because next time I saw him, he said, no, I'm halfway there. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, I now know what I'm being asked. I still don't know what the answers are. You know what I'm being asked. And on this test, that can be a challenge. Once you get past that, I'll Brian stipulate that could be an issue. But if you can get past that, whether it's a cheat sheet or that, then you can really rock and roll up some points here
That's
once
exactly right.
once that's there, because then boom, then it becomes more aim and shoot, point and click rather than judgment questions.
That's exactly right. And that's why I usually tell people this is the first place. When you start the Series 66, it's the first place, is getting those persons straight.
Right.
Federal versus state IA, federal IAR versus state IAR.
Right.
And by the way, right, I would bring this up. The de minimis only applies to the state registered IA and or IAR,
Right.
no one else.
That's
Right?
right.
So essentially, I have broker-dealer, agent, federally covered IA, along with the federally covered IAR, state IA, state IAR, right?
Right on.
So 2, 4, 6 persons laid out fairly simply. And if you can start to connect dots more than try to analyze the 47 words in each question and answer choice, right? It should become a little easier. And to your point, Dean, once you get past that, a lot of the other laws and reg questions start to become point and shoot questions.
Right.
It's a lot easier. As a matter of fact, and I think we've mentioned this in the beginning of the Series 66, that I oftentimes see folks actually score the highest in laws and regs. It's some of the other stuff that we've already covered in previous episodes.
Yeah, investments.
It's the sticking points, the quantitative analysis.
Right.
But you get those definitions of persons down, right? And the registration procedures, the 7 to 10, 9 questions that you got, man, you're rocking and rolling. That's the first place you want to start.
Right on.
Yeah. De minimis, only state IAs and state IARs.
Well, that's right.
I like that. That's probably the first mistake everybody starts making when they start studying the 66 is they apply that no more than 5.
Like I say, I'm with them. They got to first stuff it all up here. Once you get it up there, then you got to work on delineating which thing goes with which. And, know that part of the process is frustration with, applying the de minimis when it isn't part of the question, or vice versa. And if there's any exams, and I know sometimes Brian and I disagree about, performance opportunities, you got to make sure you do enough practice questions to get to where, you're getting the flow of how these things break down in terms of questions. I just finished tutoring somebody for 66 today. And I said, hey, last thing I want you to do, testing Saturday, is tomorrow I want you to do that Test Geek practice test.
Yeah.
Because that'll going to be our final mark. And I said, non-transactional relationship, let's check in, let's talk tomorrow. But that's not the learning process. That's to get the mark. And hopefully she's done enough practice questions that, she's not fumbling around with what that practice test is asking her and what answers are being offered to her.
Speaking to that point, Dean, too, because I've done 3 tutoring sessions today myself, and I laid out this clear plan. I said, okay, this is, you and I both absolutely agree. Evaluation and remediation for those last, week and a half, 2 weeks, right? And so we laid out this plan. I said, we want to see that simulated exam score, see how close you are, and the performance tracker, find out where those weak spots. Is it, these persons? And that way we can then fill in those holes. And he goes, great. Next time I'll have 4 practice finals done. I go, whoa, where did I say do 4? The goal is not to do multiple practice finals.
Oh my God.
Evaluate, remediate. Rinse,
yeah, and I told somebody today.
That all the time.
Yeah, and I had to tell somebody, you need to take a break. You can't be doing 2-3 finals a day or one every day. You can't be remediating if all you're doing is slamming practice files. So the idea is to get the mark and have it point you to the direction you need to kind of remediate on, particularly on these issues. So I think, Brian, we've talked about registration of the broker dealer. We said they have a office or they have a retail customer. Broker dealer needs to register. Agent follows the same. I would add to that, just to remind people, you can't be an agent that's registered in a state your broker dealer is not. Right. So if you have a client that, is a resident state, you're going to have to do that. And we said investment advisors, federal, state. We talked about investment advisor reps. We have not talked about registration of securities and issuers. Do we want to do that, or do we have some more things?
We do. There's just one more point I'd like to make on this, and I want to get your advice on this.
Yeah.
We know. We believe.
Yes.
That you may see a question asking you about the state administrator's authority over a federally covered advisor, right? And I think most people understand that there is none except for anti-fraud. That's the only thing a state administrator will have, okay?
Yeah.
We first teach, or at least I teach, that federally covered advisors register with the SEC only, but as a compromise to that law in 1996, they say, well, you still have to pay your state filing fees. So I then tell people there's a name for that process. It's not a registration. It's essentially just paying their state filing fees.
That's right.
Telling the administrator, leave me alone, I'm a federal advisor. Right. Do we know the name of that process?
Notification?
Notice filing. That's right.
Yeah, notice filing. So remember, that's not people get hung up on it. I don't think it's a huge test distinction, but it's not a form of registration is the point, right?
That's my point. That's exactly.
Yeah, you got to be careful.
Now, say, Dean, this is a perfect segue into registration of securities, right?
Right. I just want to point out you're absolutely right about no one and nothing is exempt from anti-fraud, right? So that's a trick question, right? Sometimes they refer to that as jurisdiction. Right. I think of jurisdiction as, like when I cross a state line, they always tell me what state I'm in because, if I'm on my way to my cabin in Arizona, I cross the Nevada line, and, the Nevada guy doesn't have any jurisdiction. All right. So you said this is a segue to securities and issuers?
That's right. Again, we know how the publishers work. They often cut and paste from all their other textbooks, so they don't have to rewrite this stuff, right?
I call that the chunk theory, right? We take a chunk.
That's right. That's exactly what it is. Yeah. And so I believe there's a lot more of this stuff in the textbook and the practice questions than ultimately will show up on the test.
I do too. I think this is really,
no doubt.
I'm totally with you, Brian. In fact, I want to give us kudos to our viewers. Brian and I could try and make a 65, 66 podcast. And I could do the chunk thing. Okay, well, it's a little over here and this is a little over there. We're trying to stay dedicated to in the lane of each particular series, even though I get why vendors do it because they're trying to save a buck here or they're trying to repurpose their content. I understand it, Brian, but I'm totally with you. I think they go completely overboard on this. I would think we talked about 9 questions in this category. And I think securities and issuer, I'd be interested in what you thought. You said 7 to 10. I think in this section, the 2 shallowest, or I should say lower probability in terms of numbers of questions are broker dealers and this.
Yes.
Maybe 2, 3 questions here.
That's right.
Again, in this area, mostly about investment advisors
and
investment advisor reps. So don't go down any rabbit hole on broker dealers and securities and issuers.
So I don't even include securities and issuers in that 7 to 9. That's just
okay. There you go. Okay.
But I agree 110% with you. Securities and issuers, 2 or 3. That's it. And the one place, and we'll get to that, is the exempt transactions, which everybody just struggles with. So first of all, I believe that you might get a basic question on the types of registration for securities.
Right.
Should we even go into the definition? All the following are securities except, there's often that question.
Well, I would know. Yeah, I think a little bit, right? It's not a security. I think I would focus on what's not a security. Like I would focus on what's not a person.
That's how I do it.
I just had the young lady today we were tutoring and she got the question right. I said, okay, so why is that not an investment advisor? And I said, it seems like they meet the ABC test. They give investment advice. They're in the business giving investment advice and they want compensation. And she nailed it. And she said, because it's investment advice about antiques and coins.
Right.
And those are not securities, right? So, I would expect you should have a general understanding of what is not a security. Insurance is not a security.
Fixed insurance, right?
Yeah. So I don't think I worry what it is. I would probably worry about what is not.
That's right.
Do you go with a Howie decision on a piece of paper that can be traded to a third party? I don't.
It's in the textbooks and practice questions. I don't believe it's on the test much anymore.
Yeah.
It might be on the 63, the little cousin,
I would point out in our
about
previous
the whiskey warehouse receipts, right? Everybody always asks me, what is it? I say, who cares? It's not a right answer.
Well, I can't resist answering the question, because in San Francisco during the fire and earthquake, the fire came all the way up to the whiskey warehouse district. And then the fire stopped, and they said, well, if God was really punishing San Francisco, why would he have not burned down the red light district in San Francisco? In the old days, you would trade that to a third party. This was how you settle your bills with whiskey warehouse receipts. That being said, where I think this is testable.
Being a great storyteller. My
on the updates,
I learn every time I talk to you, man.
The update, though, I would do is where this is relevant, I think, today in terms of updates to the exams, right, is a cryptocurrency a security? And you know that state administrators in the SEC say that certain cryptocurrencies are being offered as an investment and are securities, and therefore need to be registered. Something that's continuing being litigated. But as far as 66's exam, it's the state administrator that decides whether it's a security or not, right? But they have updated the exams, as you know, not the exams themselves, but the test specifications about digital assets. Yeah. And I think that's what that test is about. Is this digital asset being sold as a security?
I don't even know if I've heard of one.
Not yet. I'm just pointing out that it's in
the I think eventually it'll probably work its way into the test somewhere. But
there are people who have gone to jail for making unregistered offerings of crypto investment opportunities, right? So,
being the old war horses that we are,
yeah.
I remember when the internet first came in the mid to late 90s, and people were offering these penny stocks over the internet and saying, hey, we're doing it over the internet. Internet's exempt from everything, right? And the SEC said, no, it's still a security. It's got to be registered. And they were selling, swampland in Arizona over the internet, right? And it's just like SEC said, and put a big stop on that.
Well, I always joke we should probably
an evolving regulation for crypto.
Who is the SEC? I always joke, Brian. The phone rings, and it's the SEC, and they say, "Do you know who we are?" I say, "Yes. You have primary jurisdiction, interpretation, and enforcement of the domestic securities laws of the United States of America." Keyword: interpretation.
Right.
Meaning they get to decide what is a security. Now, I joke the SEC is God. State administrators think they are. Right. So there's 50 demigods running around that within their state have that same type of power, right?
That's right.
I would even think the state administrator, in terms of jurisdiction, has more power in their state than the SEC.
Yeah, that's right. When it comes to registration of securities, right, I have to tell people there's only two. There's only two methods. And again, the way in which they're always organized in textbooks, it always appears there's three. So if you get a registration question, and I believe there is one, it's a relatively simple question, right? If it's an IPO, right, a new issue, it's qualification. And it has an SEC registration, right? Then it has to be done through coordination. They're coordinating the state registration with the federal. I mean, there's that word, right? If there's a federal registration, then you have to coordinate the state registration for all IPOs.
That's right.
If it's not registered with the SEC, and an example would that be if the security is only sold in one state, that's an exemption to SEC registration, then it's qualification. And that's it. Those are the only two. Now, what's this third one everybody talks about? We already mentioned it. There are advisors, we know, right? Only have to register with the feds, don't have to register with the state. There's certain securities that are the same way.
That's right.
If it's on an exchange, if it's included in the NASDAQ system, or if it's a mutual fund, i.e. investment company.
I think the vendors, again, no surprise, get in the weeds on this, but basically, the National Securities Market Improvement Act, I wouldn't worry about that, except to know that that's where that came from. They created two buckets. The two buckets that were created were federally covered investment advisors, and the other bucket is federally covered securities. And, it took power away from the state administrators. They didn't like it because, if we're federally covered advisor, we go neener, neener, neener. I don't suggest you say that, but, I'm federally covered.
That's
Right.
right.
And then the other thing I would mention is backtracking a little bit. If I'm a broker dealer and I'm answering to the SEC, I have to register the state, but the state can't impose on a broker dealer any higher standard than I already have in terms of record retention or net capital or that.
That's right.
But that being said, you brought it up, New York, NASDAQ, mutual funds,
Right.
Reg D, a private placement under Reg D. But those are the big four, I think.
That's right. And you mentioned NISMIA, and we had already talked about how federal advisors, they don't have to register with the state, but they still have to pay filing fees. It was a compromise in that law, right? They took all that power away from the
So
state.
give you some money instead.
But they took away their revenue as well, the registration fee. So they compromised and said, we're taking the power away, but you can still have the money.
That's right.
Right? So they still have to pay filing fees, and we already know what that process is called. It's called notice filing. So it's not a method of registration.
That's
it's for federally covered advisors and federally covered securities, mutual funds, exchange listed, and NASDAQ included.
Yep.
Those are the covered securities that you may see. So I don't think it's one question on the test. Which of the following methods of registration is required for the following? It's an IPO. It has an SEC registration. Boom, coordination. Right? It's only sold in a state. There's no SEC qualification. Right?
What do you think about the
mutual fund? Right?
Yeah.
Federally covered.
How much depth do you think they need to know on exempt issuers and exempt transactions and the differences? I think it's overkill on the vendor's part, but I mean, do you think they need to know that the government is an exempt issuer, municipals are exempt from registration?
Well, I'll tell you.
Nonprofits,
Here's my thought.
Transactions by fiduciaries.
You just passed the bleepity bleep Series 7.
Yeah.
Well, you should know that U.S. govies, munis, banks, insurance companies, nonprofits are exempt anyway, right? That's exempt under the 33 Act. Well, boom, put that under the USA, they're the same.
Right.
There's a couple others, right? Canadian securities, that kind of stuff. So I list that, again, I put it in my little chart. That guy in the pink cashmere sweater going up the stairs, filing,
pink cashmere sweater.
This is an
I hope he doesn't get any wine spilt on that beautiful pink cashmere sweater.
Or have someone spill it on you.
Yes.
That's a whole different story.
I know. A story for a later day. If
you ever come to Vegas, we'll tell you that story.
We'll take you out and we'll show you the scene of the crime.
That's right. Absolutely. Oh my goodness, you troublemaker you.
Yeah.
I think there might be one question. So I try to separate the fact. There's a term that everybody struggles with: non-exempt security, non-exempt issuer. Right? What does that? Instead of reading the word non-exempt, cross it off in your brain. The guy in the pink cashmere sweater is crossing that off and putting corporate.
Yeah.
Corporate securities. Stocks and bonds.
I usually do it.
Stocks and bonds have to be registered. Of course they do.
I do it a little backwards. I say non-exempt means it ain't a government. It ain't a muni. Right? Yeah. It's not one of those. So either way, but yeah, I like it. Corporate is the way to do it.
Non-exempt means corporate. So
that's right.
Non-exempt issuer, Test Geek Exam Prep LLC. Right? It's a non-exempt issuer. It's a corporate issuer.
That's right.
Stocks and bonds, they have to be registered.
Yeah.
Exempt. If it's unsolicited, if it's done between.
Those are exempt transactions, how it's sold. So I don't know, Brian, I don't know how much time a test agent want to spend on it, but I don't know if this makes some sense. When I do it, I say an exempt security is a list. It's a noun. And an exempt transaction is a verb. It's how we're selling it that makes it exempt. It's not the security that's exempt. It's how we're selling it. Exempt security is just simply, as you mentioned, a laundry list of things, I'll do it your way, that are not corporate securities. It does work. It does work.
Exactly right. And one last thing we'll talk about this, because again, there aren't that many of them, right? The exempt transactions refer to the registration of the security, not the agent.
Oh, yeah.
Agents accepting placing securities, they still have to be registered. That doesn't
know, Brian. You have that one question, and oh my God. Yeah. As I told you, now I just tell them to call you. It's your content. And, have you defend it. But you have a question that everybody, well, I shouldn't everybody, lots of people, this is
Yes.
not right. This is, I said, please read it again. The question isn't about the security or the transaction. It's about the person who's selling it.
That's right.
And, it just drives me nuts. Somebody went so far, I may have mentioned this to you, this was a while back, was so far to tell me he checked with his STC instructor and his, past perfect instructor and his Kaplan instructor, and Dean and Brian are wrong. And I said, listen, I hate to break the news to you. We've been doing this quite a few more years than perhaps the guy who's there.
Yeah, I don't want to get into turf wars with anybody. I really don't. It's not worth it to me.
That's
I
right.
don't think
It's
worth
about
it
passing the test.
That's right. That's exactly right.
Right.
So you're right. It's read the full question.
Yeah.
It doesn't exempt the agent. It doesn't.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk one last item, and that's administrative provisions. What the administrator can do to you, basically.
Ooh.
Their power, what they can do to you. We already
I
talked
always joke,
about
Brian, they don't make as much. They're typically attorneys, and they would make more in private practice than they would make being a state administrator.
yeah,
But what they don't get in money,
they get in
your
power.
point, they get power. Yeah.
We mentioned one point to this about the felony conviction. That I hate to say it, but that question's been around for a long time.
Right.
Be careful of that. It's not the right answer because say which of the following would be reason for denial, revocation, whatever of registration, and one says a felony arrest 7 years ago, which doesn't work. I believe all the test prep vendors have a similar question. That's why I'm revealing that because they all do. So it's not even the right question, a right answer, because a felony arrest is not reason for denial. Right. It's going to be a felony conviction. So that's one thing. And to your point too, you brought this up earlier too. Jurisdiction. There's always a jurisdiction question. People often get my question wrong on that one too, right? Where the solicitation originates, where it was directed to and or accepted in, right? And they start thinking about the agent's registration. It's not about the agent's registration. It's about the administrator. Where did the solicitation originate? That's jurisdiction. Where was it directed to? In other words, did they call somebody in California? Did they call somebody in Florida? That's what we mean about directed to.
That's right.
And then they say, okay, I'll buy 1,000 shares. That's accepted. Now, were they still in Florida when they accepted it, right? Or did they go back to their home state? The textbooks like to use all three. Right. And I tell people that's a little too easy to figure out. It's all three states and probably not going to be that way. It's simply where it originates and where it's directed to is usually the answer to those questions.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. The jurisdiction, people get hung up a lot on it. And, it's mainly, your point, it's a legal term for an offer. An offer accepted becomes a sale. And so your point, where did it originate? I usually, to just make it clear, Brian, I usually put myself in Nevada. Your point, I call California.
I do the same thing.
The guy picks up the phone. I call him, next time he's up in Oregon drinking Pinot Noir. And he says, Dean, I want 24 hours to think about it. I call him. And now he's in Oregon and he accepts. And he says, let's do it. Right.
Exactly. It's a pretty common question that shows around. Again, there's one. What about penalties and liabilities, right? Up to 3 years in the Hooskow, up to a $5,000 fine? Really?
If you can pay the fine, do the crime.
Wow. Which I think it is. So, and then they might also get into the statute of limitations too.
That's right. And the other thing I would add, right of rescission. Would you be familiar with right of rescission or not?
You and I know these are absolute classics on the 63.
Right.
They do bleed over to the 66. How many of them? I don't know. I don't think they're overly challenging. Okay. Right? It's 2 years from occurrence, 3 years from acceptance, or backwards.
Whichever comes first. Right.
Yeah, that's right. That's the statute of limitation. I think these tend to be a little bit more point and shoot questions. I don't think they're that difficult. But again, let's not diminish it. There can be 4 questions on this.
Right.
And when you need 73 out of 100, I'll take these 4 easily.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So, without having to overwhelm you with all 45 questions today, we're going to have episode 4A and
Yeah,
episode 4B.
we'll call it episode 5.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
we'll call it disclosures and ethical practices or something along those lines, Brian. I think one of the challenges on the test is the narrative thread that is lacking in 66 as compared to the 7. And what I mean by that is there's not much narrative thread and there's not a lot of target rich environments, but this episode 5 is very target rich on disclosures, communication, unethical business practices. About 25 questions was what I would put
That's
that at.
probably a good estimate. That's right.
So that'll be important. So we will revisit that in episode 5. Anything else here? Thanks, Brian, for we always appreciate you on the channel, collaborating with us on the YouTube channel and serving as host today. So I just want to give you my thanks. I know the test takers love seeing you and getting your help in terms of things we've roped you into helping out on. And so I just want to give you my thanks on behalf of the other test takers, and we'll finish up this podcast with episode 5, and then we'll decide what to do next together.
Very
Right?
good. Thanks, Dan.
Remember, Brian, also, I just want to do a little commercial for Brian and his paid supplements. But remember, he does have free stuff on YouTube as well. Brian has some stuff where you can go check out some of the great free stuff that's available on YouTube. His paid supplements. Nobody does NASAA better than Brian, I think, in terms of his paid supplements for 66, 65, and for this was 66. What is it for the whole shoot match on 66? About $100 with a 20% discount.
129.
Okay.
With a guru discount, it's like 103. Yeah.
Okay, so there you go. So Brian not only has been kind enough to collaborate with us, he's also gives our viewers a 20% discount, Guru 20 on his content. So I can't recommend highly enough getting a supplement, whether it's a free supplement like the YouTube channel or a paid supplement like Brian's. This is not a time on this last leg of your testing journey to be pound wise and penny wise and pound foolish, I think is the cliche.
Yeah.
If you have the resources, make sure you use them to get yourself whatever it is you need in your quiver, any arrows in your quiver to make your mark.
And I'm finding a lot more people are actually using my supplements as well as the Guru's playlist. Yeah. I think those are a perfect combination. And the 65 and 66, these NASAA exams just scream for supplements. They really do.
Yeah. Well, your point, Brian, about the distillation. if there ever was distillation necessary, yes, it's on the NASAA exams. I probably shared my frustration with you, but Kaplan, that book, no matter what happens to the test, always gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, even though the test hasn't changed.
No, it really hasn't. So it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
All right, Dean. Great, man. This is a lot of fun doing this.
Okay, so
out there, look for episode 5.
You got it.
Coming up very shortly.
Very shortly. Remember, as I always say, inch by inch. Your exam is a cinch, yard by yard. Your exam is hard. And Brian?
Keep it simple. Stay with what you know. You take the test. Don't let the test take you.
All right, everybody. We'll see you for episode 5. Bye-bye.
Take care now. Bye-bye.